Over 10 years ago, I became intrigued by the concept of self-directed learning, autodidacts, pedagogy, self-determined learning, self-taught individuals in different fields. I became intrigued by this idea that people have figured out how to learn things without a teacher. But after I dove into it, I realized that's not quite accurate, because a self-directed learner is one who has hundreds or even thousands of teachers. It's just not necessarily a learning environment that's entirely prescribed or established by a teacher. There are lots of mentors and other people and guides for everyone as we learn different things. But I noticed a trend that was beginning to develop growing interest in self-directed learning. I became interested in it, and I came to believe that it was a critical part of nurturing people and equipping people to really thrive in this contemporary world. We can certainly teach people things and they develop a skill for a time period, but if we can teach them to actually learn things for a lifetime, now we have something powerful. Of course, that's probably where the cliche adage came from, right? You can give a man a fish and he'll have fish for a day. You can teach a man to fish, he'll have fish for a lifetime. Well, when it comes to learning, we want to have fishing lessons. We want to equip people to figure out how to learn things on their own. And figuring out how to learn things on your own doesn't mean that you're doing it individually or alone, but you're guiding and leading the effort. So one of the ways that people do this, if you're teaching in a legacy environment, or if you are a learner and you want to figure out how to do something and yet you need a little bit of structure and guidance to get you going, is you can use a simple template or guide to help you get started. About 8 or 9 years ago, I started gathering different templates and guides that I found out in the world. There were tons of examples. One beautiful one from 4-H. Perhaps you've heard of it, and maybe you've been involved in that at some point in your life. And I found lots of interesting templates. I took the best of all of those, I simplified it, and I created a simple Google Doc. And the Google Doc is a guide, and it just goes through some very basic questions about self-directed learning, how to create a self-directed learning project for yourself, or if you're a teacher, how to help your students design a self-directed learning project or groups of students. And I put it out on the web, and I do speak a lot. I had given hundreds of invited and keynote presentations around the United States and around the world, and every so often I'd make a little reference to this. And so that is now, to this day, one of the most visited articles that I've ever published on the web, where people go to this little article where I have a link to a Google Doc, and people download it and they make a copy of it and they use it in their classrooms or they use it for themselves. And it's really fascinating to see people from around the world. I think I've counted at least 50 or 50 plus countries represented, and people who are visiting it and apparently copying it and using it. So I'm going to take you on a little guide today, and we're going to go through this template together. So here we go. What you see here is the template. Again, very simple, very basic, a personal learning plan template. And I've broken it up in a series of questions. The first question that you start with is, what is my driving question? What is the question that will drive my inquiry? The idea behind this is you want to pick something that you're really curious about, something that's personally compelling, something that you want to discover, a problem that you want to solve. And the first step, if you are the self-directed learner or if you're guiding people to be self-directed learners, is to help them establish their inquiry. What is it that they want to explore? What is the question they want to examine or come to understand better? And you want to pick something, again, that's really meaningful, that relates to perhaps some need in the world or something that's real and authentic. That's the first step. And so what one does is they simply map out the question here. The second question is, how will I pursue answers to this question? So now I've established the question. Here's what I want to learn. And now I'm going to answer the question, what's my plan for finding out about it? How am I going to learn about this? How am I going to explore some answers to it? And I give a few examples here to prompt people. It might be you're going to gather a bibliography of articles or books or other resources or YouTube videos, other things like that that you might want to use. You might decide, I'm going to go on some field trips. I want to see this in action. I want to see other people who've answered this, or I want to see things that in the world related to my question. You can conduct experiments. They can be formal or informal experiments. You can figure out interviews. Who are the most knowledgeable people or interesting people that I know or I don't know in the world? And then you list, I would love to reach out to them and ask if I could interview them, which, by the way, I'll have a whole nother video on later. Interviewing people is an incredible form of self-directed learning and lifelong learning that many people just don't do because they're nervous about it. And I can talk about that later. But for now, interviewing people, new experiences. Maybe you want to try something. You've never experienced something that's related to your question. Maybe you conduct some kind of formal research, or you want to create a survey, or you're going to build a network. You're going to go and find some online networks where people are grappling with that question, or they've already answered it, or they've struggled with it, and you want to connect with it. So online communities. That's what you're going to do for this second piece then. So you're just going to map out what are the things I want to do. And you want to make it as detailed as possible. Think about this as the blueprint you're going to use to build a house, your learning house. And so you want to have it as detailed as possible. Or if you're guiding others, you want to guide them to be as detailed as possible. But it's okay to just do a really rough draft and fill in the blanks, and then you go through and you do a second round, and you keep doing that until it gets refined enough that you have a plan that you can actually use. Okay, let's keep going here. Third question is, how will I document and reflect on my learning journey? I've found, and I know a lot of people skip this, but it's really valuable. Self-reflection is a critical tool for self-directed learning. So it's really valuable to take time to pause and to reflect on what you are learning. And you can do journaling, you can do all sorts of other things. And if you're a teacher guiding and facilitating self-directed learning projects, this is your glimpse into the learner's mind and experience and journey. You can ask them to keep a learning journal online or in a learning management system or somewhere where you and the peers perhaps can see what's happening, and you can actually step in and guide if someone's stuck. But it could be in any form. And if you're working with a teacher or coach, I mentioned that in this template because a lot of teachers use it, but if you're doing it on your own, it's always great to share your reflection with other people because you get feedback. But if you are working with a teacher or a coach or a guide, or you ask someone who can be a guide on your project, you want to share this piece with them. It should be something where they can review it at any time along the journey, and a little accountability never hurts. And then you plan to update it. I always recommend to try to update it at least twice a week. It depends upon the scope of your project. This could be a project that's going to take you a week, a month, a year, or 10 years. And so update it a couple times a week. Again, it could be a wiki, a blog, a Google Doc, a video, a diary. It could be all sorts of things. Now you map that out, come up with your plan, create your space eventually, and now we go on to the next question. Next question is, what is going to be the culminating product or project or performance that will be the result of my work? So what I usually encourage people to do, if you have a question, come up with the answer to this. What would be really strong, compelling evidence in a court of law that I have indeed answered the question or I've accomplished my goal? And think of that. That's going to be your project or your performance or whatever it is, and make a goal of getting to that point. So this can be used, a self-directed learning project can be used for gaining new knowledge. For example, maybe I am intrigued and I just moved to Vermont and I want to understand sort of the best trails and the tips for hiking in the Green Mountains and safety tips and so forth. Maybe my question is something like that. So I figure out people to interview, people who have hiked a lot in the Green Mountains. I maybe get documents for trails for my other questions and all. But what would be the culminating product or project? Maybe it's going to be a massive hike that I go on and I document it. And I show that I've indeed learned how to hike safely in the Green Mountains because I did it. And it could be something that's more sort of cerebral, where you're studying, maybe you're interested in neuroscience and you have some interesting neuroscience question. The product or project could be something more traditional, like a presentation that you're going to give to others to share your knowledge. It could be a written paper or a collection of blog entries or videos where you share your knowledge. Or it could be actually something that you create, a model or whatever. Make it something fun and interesting. I give some ideas here. They could be papers, presentations, performances, models, photo journals, events that you plan. and host. They could be things you design or things you create. Maybe you want to be a game designer and your question was about how to design great games. Maybe your product is one or more games or a portfolio of games that you design. And now we go on to the next question, which is, how will I monitor my progress and get feedback on my progress throughout the project? The last thing that you want is to be working on a project and get to the very end and think you've made great progress and you'd gone the wrong direction. You were stuck, you made some major mistakes somewhere along the way, and you never figured it out. So wouldn't it have been nice to get some feedback from someone and to know that maybe you were not going the right direction so you could change course? That's what you want. So you want to plan in your self-directed learning project, how am I going to get some feedback? How do I get feedback? So how am I going to monitor my progress and get feedback on the progress throughout the project? And I give some ideas here in the document. You can have peers or teachers or other experts you find out there or family members give you feedback. It's always good to have people give you feedback who know something about what you're doing because they have a level of nuance. They know what's important and what's less important. But anyone can work. Again, your goal is feedback. And then next question you want to answer is, what's the tentative timeline for my project? So map it out. You can give yourself, make it an 8-week project, a 2-week project, a 2-year project, a 10-year project. Give yourself some milestones. The longer it is, the more likely you're going to get demotivated or lose traction or get distracted along the way. So you want to give yourself some milestones if it's too long. But what's your tentative timeline? Now keep in mind though, this is a self-directed learning project. So you can revise your timeline. If you are doing this with a teacher in a class and you're a teacher and you're going to use this with your students, there may be a fixed deadline, but I always encourage educators, if they're helping students design self-directed learning projects, I always encourage them to be a little flexible. Give the learner an opportunity to experiment with actually changing their own schedule. I remember one time when I was doing self-directed learning projects in a class, and one of my students came up to me really horrified because she was not on track with the timeline she had submitted to me, and she was really worried that she was going to get an F or something like that. And she came to me and said, I'm missing my deadline. I don't know what to do. And I said, oh, okay, well, why don't you change it? And she looked at me so baffled because in all of her years of education, she'd never been in an environment where she actually had the ability to change the due dates or the deadlines. And we did have a fixed deadline, the end of the class, but I gave them some flexibility, and she changed her timeline. She stuck with it, and she learned from it and actually produced some really amazing work. So give people a chance to have that kind of agency. And then the next one is, what are some key resources to get started? So what I always encourage people to do with this question is, you get very lost. Up above, you may have a long list of readings and everything. So I always encourage people to start with 3 to 5 key places to start. A couple of short videos, a couple of short articles, a couple of people to talk to, but just a few starting points. Because once you get that initiative, you get that momentum, that's going to really help you move. And now we go on to the last question is, how will this project connect with one or more key standards or learning outcomes? I throw that on there for the teachers and the learners. If you're a teacher and you're using this, you may have to justify this individual or self-directed work on the basis of some kind of standards that everything has to be aligned to. And this is where you can put that in. Now, one thing I want to note, I love this project. This project template. I use it for myself for learning different things. I've used it informally to help other people when I've coached and mentored people in developing different skills and practices and new knowledge. But if you're a teacher and you're working with other learners, please note that self-directed learning is a spectrum. It can be all the way from teacher-directed to self-directed. And this template, you can actually fill in some of these blanks for the learners. So maybe you state, here are the standards that we're going to meet. And everyone knows, I can ask any question I want, but it has to align with this standard. Or you may decide that you're going to have to frame the question or give students a limited number of questions from which they can choose. Or maybe you're going to have a standard and there are going to be certain key resources that everyone has to use. So you do have that flexibility as a teacher. You can take this template and make it your own and make some parts required that you fill in advance, pre-filled out, and other parts where the learner can fill it out. Or you can keep it as open as you're able to in your learning environment. So there's lots of flexibility with this. So that's it. That's this self-directed learning template. I hope you find it useful. And if you do, I will put a link in the comment area below so you can actually go right to the Google Doc and you can make a copy of it and use it. Notice in the document, if you take a look, you'll see that this is licensed under Creative Commons attribution, so that means that you're free to use this or reprint it. I just ask that you give credit. So you can actually just leave that little section at the bottom that gives credit to me for just putting this together. And that's about it. If you found this useful, go ahead and let me know about it in the comment section. If you have any questions or comments, you can put those obviously in the comment section as well. And if you liked it, hit that like button. If you're interested in more content like this, go ahead and subscribe.